David had been working the night shift at a small 24-hour gas station for years. He was used to the eerie silence that came after midnight, the flickering neon sign casting long, twisted shadows on the pavement. The station was in a remote area, with only the occasional traveler stopping for gas or snacks. One night around 2:45 a.m., a car pulled up, a rusty old sedan with its headlights off. David watched as a tall, gaunt man stepped out, his movements stiff and unnatural. He was dressed in an old, tattered suit, his skin pale as if he hadn't seen the sun in years. The man didn't go to the pumps. Instead, he walked straight into the store. David greeted him with a nervous nod. "Need any help?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he wandered through the aisle slowly, his long fingers skimming over the snack bags, but never picking anything up. The air in the store felt heavier, the fluorescent lights buzzing loudly as if they too were uneasy. After a few minutes, the man approached the counter and stared at David with the dark, sunken eyes. Then he finally spoke. "Do you remember me?" David's stomach dropped. He had no idea who this man was, but something about his voice, it felt familiar, like a memory buried deep in his mind. "I don't think so," David said, forcing a weak chuckle. The man smiled, revealing yellowed, uneven teeth. "You should." Before David could react, the man placed something on the counter. It was an old Polaroid photo of David as a child standing in front of a birthday cake. His breath caught in his throat. "What the hell?" David stammered. The man turned and walked out without another word. David ran to the door, but the sedan was gone. It hadn't started, hadn't made a sound. It had simply vanished into the night. The next day, David checked the security footage. The cameras had caught everything, except the man. The doors had opened on their own. The photo had appeared out of nowhere, and David had been talking to nothing. Sonia was a nurse working the night shift at an old hospital, a place with a long history of strange occurrences. She had heard the stories from the other staff about ghostly whispers in empty hallways, call lights turning on in unoccupied rooms, shadows moving in places they shouldn't. But she never believed in such things. That changed one night. Around 3 a.m., she was asked to retrieve supplies from the basement storage room. The elevator ride down was slow, the lights inside flickering erratically. When the door slid open, she stepped into the cold, dimly lit corridor. The air smelled of antiseptic and something older, something rotten. She hurried to the storage room, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. As she reached for the door handle, she heard a faint noise, a shuffling sound like someone dragging their feet. "Hello?" she called out. No response. She quickly grabbed the supplies and turned to leave, but then she heard it again, closer this time. It came from deeper within the basement. Against her better judgment, she took a few steps forward, peering down the long, dark hallway. At the far end, just beyond the reach of the dim light, stood a figure. It was small, hunched, and its head was tilted at an unnatural angle. Sonia's breath caught in her throat as the figure twitched and took a step forward. The overhead lights flickered violently, and for a brief second she saw its face. Sunken eyes, a twisted, gaping mouth, and pale, decayed skin stretched over sharp bones. Sonia bolted for the elevator, jabbing the button frantically. The doors took forever to open. Behind her, the shuffling turned into rapid footsteps. Something was running toward her. The elevator finally opened, and she threw herself inside, slamming the close door button. As the door shut, she caught a final glimpse of the creature, standing just inches away, its head jerking from side to side, watching her with hollow, lifeless eyes. When she reached the main floor, Sonia ran to the security desk and asked to check the basement cameras. The guard hesitated, then pulled up the footage. The screen showed her in the basement, grabbing supplies. But when she ran to the elevator, she was alone. No figure, no footsteps, nothing. That was the last time she ever worked a night shift at that hospital. Like and subscribe now. Are you brave enough to join the hunt? Lucas worked as a night guard in a small cemetery on the outskirts of town. A quiet job, he thought, where his only task was to patrol the perimeter and make sure no one disturbed the resting place. But in recent weeks, something had changed. Every night at 2:37 a.m., the alarm in the cemetery chapel would go off. At first, he only found the door slightly open with no one inside. But as the days passed, things became more unsettling. Benches out of place, candles lit on their own, and an oppressive feeling of being watched. That night, Lucas decided to set up his phone with the camera recording near the chapel entrance. As expected, the alarm rang again. He rushed over and found the door wide open, a cold draft flipping the pages of an old Bible on the pulpit. There was no sign of an intruder, but when he checked the video, his blood ran cold. The footage showed the chapel door slowly creaking open on its own. Then a tall, shadowy figure moved inside, formless, shifting. But the most terrifying detail was at the end. The silhouette stopped right in front of the camera and seemed to stare directly into the lens, as if it knew it was being watched. Lucas quit the next morning. No one could ever explain what had happened, but the chapel alarm continued to ring every night at 2:37 a.m. Jordan worked as a stalker in the clothing section, tasked with tidying up before closing time. It was a boring shift, until the mannequins started changing positions. He would arrange them, turn away, and when he looked back, they'd be slightly different. Arms bent at unnatural angles, heads tilted as if watching him. At first, he blamed exhaustion, but then he heard the faint creak of plastic moving even when the store was empty. One night, as he was locking up, he saw a mannequin standing in the middle of an aisle, one he definitely hadn't placed there. Its head was twisted all the way around, facing backward in an impossible position. When he cautiously approached to move it, he noticed faint scratches around the mannequin's neck. Convinced it was a prank, he laughed it off, until he heard footsteps following him to his car. Under the flickering glow of a parking lot lamp, he saw a tall figure standing still. When he blinked, it was gone. Jordan refused to work night shifts after that. But weeks later, he found a mannequin identical to the one from that night sitting on his porch. A note was taped to its hand. "You shouldn't have turned around. Like and subscribe now. Are you brave enough to join the hunt?" It was nearing midnight, and Lily wiped the counter of the diner for what felt like the 100th time that evening. She hated closing shifts. The flickering neon sign outside, the hum of the old refrigerator, and the way the windows reflected the empty diner like a distorted mirror. Only one customer remained. An older man with wrinkled hands and tired eyes sat in a booth, slowly stirring his cold coffee. He hadn't spoken a word since he came in, just stared down at his cup. Lily cleared her throat. "We're closing in 10 minutes, sir." The man finally looked up, his eyes glistening with something that made Lily's stomach twist. "It's not safe to leave yet," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Lily forced a smile. "I promise I'll be fine." The man shook his head. "They always come at midnight." Her heart skipped a beat. "Who?" The man didn't answer. He simply slid a small, crumpled piece of paper across the table. Lily picked it up with shaky fingers. It was a newspaper clipping, a story about a diner waitress who had gone missing exactly a year ago. The article mentioned the woman's name, Lily Cooper. Her hands started to tremble. That's my name," she whispered, looking back at the man. But the booth was empty. The coffee cup sat untouched, cold as ice. The clock on the wall struck midnight. The lights flickered. And outside, in the reflection of the glass, Lily saw a dark silhouette standing just beyond the glow of the neon sign. Watching. Waiting. Emma worked the night shift at a small-town Walmart. The store was massive but eerily quiet after midnight. She didn't mind the solitude until she discovered an aisle that wasn't supposed to be there. One night, while restocking shelves, Emma turned a corner and found herself in a dimly lit aisle she'd never seen before. The shelves were lined with products covered in dust, faded cereal boxes, rusty cans, and cracked porcelain dolls with hollow eyes. Thinking it was just an unused storage section, she tried to call her manager over the radio. But all she heard was static, followed by a distorted voice whispering, "Don't stay too long." As she backed away, she heard faint footsteps behind her. She spun around, but the aisle was empty. The farther she walked, the longer the aisle seemed to stretch. A shadow flickered at the end of the aisle, and a hand, too long and bony, peeked around the corner, beckoning her. Panicked, she sprinted back, finally finding herself in a normal part of the store. She told her manager, but when they returned to check, the aisle was gone. Emma quit the next day. Like and subscribe now. Are you brave enough to join the hunt? Ethan worked as a gravedigger in a small-town cemetery. He was not a superstitious man, but that February night something felt different. The cold was sharper, and an unnatural silence hung over the field of tombstones. He had just finished covering the last grave of the day when he noticed something strange, a new polished headstone that he didn't remember seeing before. His flashlight beam illuminated the inscription, Ethan Carter, born 1985, died 2024. A shiver ran down his spine. He assumed it was some kind of sick joke, maybe a prank by a coworker. But as he stepped back, his foot hit something. The ground behind him was freshly disturbed, as if someone had just dug a grave, an empty grave. That was when he heard the first knock, a dull, muffled sound from beneath the soil, then another, and another. Something was knocking from inside the coffin. Ethan didn't wait to find out what it was. He dropped his flashlight and ran without looking back. The next day, he returned with the cemetery manager, but the headstone was gone. Only solid earth remained undisturbed. Yet ever since that night, whenever Ethan walks past that spot, he still hears the faintest sound, as if someone is still trying to get out. Ben had worked at the diner for years, and he'd seen his fair share of weird customers. But Table 6? Table 6 creeped him out. It started with a man who always sat there, same time, same seat, every Saturday night. He wore a black hoodie, kept his head down, and never spoke more than a few words. He ordered a burger and fries, but only ever picked at the food. One night, Ben finally decided to chat with him. "Hey man, you come here a lot. Are you okay?" The man slowly lifted his head. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow and dark. "I like to be here," he said. "It's where I died." Ben laughed, thinking it was a joke. But the man didn't smile. He just stared, unblinking. After the man left, Ben mentioned the conversation to his manager. She went pale. "No one sat at Table 6 in months," she said. "Ever since that guy died there. Heart attack, right in the booth." Ben felt the blood drain from his face. He ran to the booth, wiping the table down with shaking hands. But as he leaned in, he saw something carved into the wood. "Thank you for talking to me." The words were fresh. The wood splintered as if scratched by nails. Ben quit the next day, but Table 6 still sits empty, except sometimes when staff catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure sitting there late at night. Like and subscribe now. Are you brave enough to join the hunt?